My name is Moriba Jah, and I'm an aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics professor at the University of Texas at Austin, where I lead a transdisciplinary research program in space safety, security, and sustainability. And I've partnered with SpaceWatch.Global to start a new series of web talks, cafes, space cafes called Moriba's VOX POPULI, which is Latin for people's voice. So I hope to see you there. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be candid conversations about all sorts of stuff related to space safety, security, and sustainability. I am a space watcher.
It's Thursday afternoon in Switzerland. It's Space Café Moriba's VOX POPULI time. Our next edition will begin very soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback, and we will learn and improve based on the feedback you give. My name is Chiara Monter. I'm the event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global and host of the Space Café Benelux, together with my co-host Barnu Bazingi. SpaceWatch is a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already very familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. Our latest episode is another masterpiece with Bal Musanami, CEO of Sansa, about the space innovations from Africa. So definitely check it out. It is worth your time. We've also opened our fan shop online, where you can support us actively and become a space watcher. Edition 1 has awesome merchandising products for you, your friends, and the ones you love. And your support is needed to keep our work alive for you. So if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the events section, as well as on our YouTube channel. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to hand over to your host today, who's in New Orleans, Professor Moriba Jah. Over to you.
Wow. All right. So, yep, I'm on the road. I'm transmitting live and direct from New Orleans or Nolans, as I hear on the streets here. And look, this is an exciting day, an exciting session. I'm really happy to be able to have such awesome, guests with me today. And really, what we're going to try to focus on here is a few things. One, we hear about space environmentalism and what is that? What is space sustainability? Some of us have heard these terms before. I can tell you that I know that there's work to be done when my own family, my aunt specifically, basically doesn't understand why somebody like me is actually employed. She's like, hey, look, there's all these problems going on with the earth and water and the oceans and all this other stuff. Like, why do we need space? Like, we're wasting money even thinking about space, right? So even my own family tends to have that kind of view. And I'd say by and large, a lot of people just don't realize if there is any sort of connection between space and other ecosystems and that sort of stuff. So part of today's session is really to say, look, environmentalism is important. We've heard a lot of stuff on climate change for many years now. Interestingly enough, there was a recent G7 meeting where they underscored the importance of space sustainability. And for sure, in the United States, the new administration, the Biden, Kamala Harris administration is really focused on climate change. I can tell you that in a conversation that I've had in the past, even with Al Gore, there seemed to be a disconnect between this idea of climate change and environmental protection kind of in general. I've heard people say, well, space debris, that's not a climate change issue. So that's not really something that we should be concerned about anytime soon in the same context as, global warming and these sorts of things. Interestingly enough, very recently as well, in doing my own research, I've looked into this thing called Correlation Pleiades. It's something that a couple of Russian folks back in the 60s kind of came up with this term Pleiades, as in like the cluster of stars. So Pleiades is really just a way to label a cluster. And basically in biological systems, this idea of correlation Pleiades is saying, look, if we look at an entire organism holistically at different systems, can we find features and traits that seem to exhibit correlated behavior across different systems? And if so, maybe we can find some causal relationships between these features and traits. And so my whole thing with the correlation Pleiades, or wanting to motivate partly a discussion about this, is to say, what if we evaluated the Earth, let's call it the Gaia system of land, air, oceans, and space? What if we brought these four things together and considered this one body? Could we evaluate the correlation Pleiades of this Gaia system and find features and traits across land, air, oceans, and space that are actually linked, and maybe even find some causal relationships? So, with that said, I want to present to you our guest. We have Professor Joellen Russell at University of Arizona. She's, I'm just going to say, everybody here is a badass. And so starting with Joellen, she has lots of badassery, as I say, in climate and ocean research at the University of Arizona. We have Professor Danielle Wood at MIT, and she has lots of different hats. I keep on finding more hats that she's wearing kind of on a daily basis, and everything from really deep technical know-how in space systems to African diaspora studies and leading that at MIT, and social justice issues. We have Dr. Imogen Nabor, Imi, who I had the really awesome pleasure of starting to know just over a year ago. And she's big time into ocean debris, microplastics, and that sort of stuff, and brings a lot to the table, and has an association with Nat Geo on this front. And then we have Professor Michael Weber, who's an awesome researcher. And look, he has public persona and energy and conservationalism and all these other things, and brings a lot to bear here. So with that said, I want to welcome all of you, and I wanted to see if any of you just wanted to kick off and give any sort of your own insights into this, your own perspectives, just to kick off the conversation.
I've got all sorts of thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, so, go ahead, man.
First of all, thanks for having me on this. And I think this is a great comment that you made, that perhaps all these things are connected. And I would say, as an energy engineer who works on earthbound systems, I got here through space, which is I started in aerospace engineering, was going to work on space propulsion or something like that. Did a couple summers at NASA developing supersonic combustion ramjet engines to do high-speed transport. And that got me into the energy world, because energy and converting energy from chemical stored rocket fuels into propulsion is at the heart of that. So I became an energy guy because of the energy needs of space exploration. And as I continue to teach about energy and the environment, it's clear to me in many ways that the eye in the sky gives us a better view of what's going on at Earth than we can see from a very close distance. In many ways, we can measure our water resources and aquifers below ground more accurately from space than we can from the well itself. And so distance can be very clarifying for us when it comes to environmental issues. And a lot of people really peg the birth of the environmental movement to going into space and seeing the Earth in this holistic sense, seeing that we have connected oceans and atmosphere, which isn't something that was new. We knew that, but somehow seeing in a visual way really made it work. So in the environmental community, there's a lot of obvious connections that space is where we need to go to see the Earth more clearly. It helped launch the environmental movement. And for individuals like me, helped get me to be an energy and environmental guy after chasing dreams to be a space propulsion guy. So I think your thesis is correct, if my experience is at all any evidence.
Very cool. Thanks a lot for that, Michael. Anybody else? All right, Joellen, step right up.
So I use robot floats and satellites and supercomputers to try and predict what happens next with, Earth's future. And a lot of that is we really should be planet ocean, not planet Earth. But now that we have whole atmosphere models that go all the way up into, fully the ionosphere, we're seeing more and more connections between convection and gravity waves and the circulation of our outer edges. And there have been really recent, absolutely spectacular papers showing that climate change is actually affecting the drag on satellites directly. Absolutely affecting it. And so when you're talking about what are these patterns and connections, one, of course, it's connected. And as we gain better technical proficiency, we're better able to see, to quantify, to that took a whole lot of, these are like cathedrals of knowledge being created by decades of labor from teams of tens and hundreds of scientists. This doesn't just emerge, it comes out of all of us coming together as people and starting to take that larger view of our whole impact, right? So having Imi talking about, debris in the ocean, debris in space, what is our impact? And what are the length of time of the impact that we're having? And how will these systems knock on to each other? And I'm really curious to hear what Danielle thinks of all of this, because, it's that human perspective, because it's not just what are we doing, but what will we do? What will we do with all of this enormous impact we're having on our tiny blue spaceship, right? This is, I love Carl Sagan's, everyone you've ever loved, every book you've ever read, is from here. This is our home, the only home. I mean, we keep looking for water and blue planets, but this is it. Tiny.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing about what you just said, Joellen, about Carl Sagan's quote, is I saw something this kind of a meme thing on Facebook recently, and it was with the Olympics, and it showed gold medals in the Olympics by planet, and it's all stacked on Earth, right? So it's like no other planet got any Olympic gold medals, it's only planet Earth, right? So yeah, it's like everything that we know in terms of life, history, people, it's all here, and until we find a way to thrive elsewhere in the universe, it's only going to be here. So
and when Michael said that space helped us understand our little tiny blue spaceship, it's also not just space. I mean, it was Voyager, and it was Carl Sagan who actually said, hey, NASA, tell Voyager to turn around. Stop just looking at the edge of what we can see and look back at who we are hanging there in the dark night, right? Just this tiny blue pale dot, right? So, but I want to hear Danielle's perspective and Imi's.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Danielle or Imi, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Joe. And I was thinking it'd be fun to follow on some of the ideas you're bringing. So thank you for the invitation. And I love this question of the impact, what role humans play. The mission statement for my team, called Space Enabled at the MIT Media Lab, we say that we seek to advance justice in Earth's complex systems using designs enabled by space. And we didn't spend a lot of time debating what it means to advance justice. I teach whole classes where we ask the question for the whole semester. We read lots of historians and political scientists and economists, and we debate what it means. And one of the things I think it means is asking what a given generation does toward the future generations. But I also spend a lot of time encouraging my students and whoever is willing to listen and dialogue with me to look at history. So looking backwards, we can think about some key moments in human history and the ways that we interacted with our planet. Especially, I've been reflecting on the period in the 1400s to 1500s when being able to transfer people and cargo at large scale on large ocean-going vessels became more common. So you gradually see this technology being absorbed by countries and developed by countries like China, and Portugal starts to get really active and other European countries get involved. And at that time, it led to a few key choices at the global scale. It led to global, in this case, a transatlantic slave trade and to mass colonization activities in what's now called the Americas. And also, gradually that same trend leads to industrial revolution. So the idea of having labor that you can draw and basically extract at low cost from Africa, and then being able to draw natural resources and this is fabric that can go into textile mills in northern England. This becomes a pattern, and it's now a global enterprise. And it's starting the process of creating the greenhouse gas emissions that we are still thinking about today. And so we use the technology of the sailing ship to create an economic globalization that has not managed the planet safely. And it means that at the time, waste was not managed thoughtfully, meaning the question of we're spewing gas and we kind of can see it's toxic, people are getting sick from it, but that's okay, we're gonna keep doing it because it's important to grow these economic activities. So today we have another form of ship that we're considering. And now I'm asking the question, what will the impact be of humans on both this planet as well as wherever we go next? Because our pattern so far is build the new technology, expand our ability to travel across oceans, and then perhaps across planets, across locations in the broader solar system. And I'm concerned we're going to continue to have this pattern of maximize economic activity, take advantage of the poor, of those who may have less political power and less technology, and extract human labor in unfair ways, and make a mess in the environment. And we've done it in the oceans, we've done it in our atmosphere with spewing CO2, and we've done it also in Earth orbit. I'm concerned we're about to go do it if we're not careful, if we're not thoughtful on the moon, for example. So we have a pattern of spewing waste and then also exploiting both land and labor and water in a way that really is counter to what we look at if you consider indigenous communities that have really lived in harmony with their natural environment for generations. One of the things my team likes to do is to spend time listening to different indigenous communities, whether it's in the Americas or in places like India or Africa, and those who have traditions where they actually have been able to function in one location without depleting the environment over generations and have a sense of their culture being tied to that place. Those communities have lessons for us to learn because we must stop the process of generating so much waste that our impact is, economic growth and, power and money to the elite, and then, poverty for the poor and environmental despoiling. That's our pattern so far, but we can do better. And the chance we have now to think about the next generation of activities in Earth orbit and also the moon, this is a vital chance. We might be making decisions now, this generation, that are going to set the pace and set the standard for how we behave as humans for generations to come.
Booyah, Danielle, booyah. Like that is, yeah. Bravo, bravis. It's like spot on tickety boo, as they say. And I have quite a bit to kind of unpack with that. But Imi, why don't you weigh in a little bit?
So caveat, I don't really know anything about space. I'm not a space scientist. I'm fully marine scientist and I specialize in plastic pollution. And I've been best called a plastic detective because I look at specific sources of plastic getting into our oceans and then using that knowledge and that expertise about how we can then try and make changes in industry or government or our own lives to try and make the situation better. So it's all really, thanks, pinpointing one specific area, which I think can be really successful. To give an example of that, we did the initial work of microbeads in facial scrubs. So microbeads were tiny plastic particles that were put into facial scrubs to get the dead skin cells off to make your skin really smooth. But no one had done any research before looking at how many tiny plastic particles could be in a bottle. So I was in the lab for crazy hours, extracting it from different products, different companies, all of these tiny plastic particles. And we found that in one bottle there could be 3 million, which is bonkers. So, and a squirt on your hand, there could be over 10,000, and you'd be washing your face, they'd be going down the drain and potentially into our oceans, which is, a shared environment, like we keep saying. We're very lucky to have the ocean that connects us all. But then it created a really powerful movement, especially in the UK and in the US, about how people were just upset and angry that they didn't know plastic was in these products. So they started to boycott them, and industry started to listen and voluntarily removed plastic from their products. And then governments, albeit a little bit slower, I think US was one of the first with Obama, but then banned plastic microbeads in facial scrubs. But it all kind of just came from my very small lab in Plymouth in the 6th floor, just identifying how many was in one bottle. So the first thing we need to do is just identify the problem and the specific source. And then fling forward many or so years after my PhD, and I connected with Moriba because I was really curious about how space and the oceans are very similar. I mean, they're extremely different, but if you think about it, they're also really similar. It's like our shared environment. And it just seems bonkers that what's happened in our ocean is now happening out in space. And it feels like that this is a situation that we can grasp and control now. And we can learn from the lessons that we failed on with the oceans and lessons learned, and apply those into space and see if we can just try and make a difference quicker.
I think that's awesome, Imi. I mean, you know, welcome here to the group, and precisely because of your, you know, lack of expertise in space, but all the expertise you have in the oceans is exactly why it's great to have you in this conversation. And yeah, I mean, the lessons learned is something that we need to highlight and see how we can apply those to space, because, you know, as you know, in the discussions that we've had, it's like the amount of debris that is being proliferated in space is just increasing almost without bound. And with larger participation, kind of this boom in people wanting to utilize space more, you know, we're just going to see that also increase without bound unless we do something. So, and I can tell you from the debris perspective, the biggest culprit for you know, the proliferation of debris, the reason we can't flatten the curve on that is because people aren't paying attention to the science and like complying with the guidelines that scientists have said. Hey, if you follow this checklist, these things can help flatten the curve on the spread of debris, the proliferation of this stuff. And a lot of these things are not codified into space laws, and I think that's one of the issues. And people seem to be hesitant to codify this into space laws, which I don't fully understand, but I'm trying to explore that. So no, so thank you for that. And I guess, yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I'm kind of ignorant of some of these issues, but it seems like a particle of pollution in space is potentially a much higher consequence event than a particle of pollution in the oceans. Not that any one is less important than the other, but what I'm saying is like a small piece of debris can cause immediate death or damage in space. On Earth and on the oceans, it's an accumulation of debris. And so we tend to ignore the pollution in the United States because one plastic bead is probably not going to kill me. Of course, bazillions of them will do all sorts of damage. So we tend to get seriously, but one small plastic bead or whatever the debris is in space could, you know, bring down an expensive piece of equipment or kill someone. So I would think that space pollution would be taken more seriously because it poses immediate threat and risk to human life and equipment. Whereas our lazy ability to ignore pollution in the oceans, because that one little plastic bag is not going to kill me now, even though it might kill someone else later. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to justify the pollution, but I think that space pollution would get more attention because we humans tend to make decisions around immediacy better than slowly accumulating long-term effects.
What I like is Moriba's mention of regulation, right? Space law, et cetera, and Imi's plastic detection. I do carbon accounting in the ocean, right, with robot floats, et cetera. And the reason we do this is that we're contributing with all the people monitoring the atmosphere and land emissions, et cetera. We're basically doing a top-down constraint on the top 10 economies' impact on the atmosphere. And her attribution, you know, who did this? Who dumped that? Who put that into our environment is a way to do collective social pressure, right? The social scientists tell us that if you know how much how your electric bill compares to your neighbors, you will cut your use just because you're competitive. Even if you're the best in the neighborhood, they see a drop in use because they don't want to be the one who's that horrible, you know, used everything, you know, waster of resources, right? So when it's visible, people, if all of the sheep on our global commons, in our ocean, in our space, if all of the sheep were tagged with a color according to who they were put on the commons by, they would regulate their use, just self-regulation, as opposed to specific laws, etc. Now, I think they both are necessary. I just worry that when we make a law, you also have to have a means to enforce it. And right now, that's pretty difficult, except for saying, hey, look at, hey, China, you just, emitted all this extra coal emissions, we would really appreciate you not blowing it in our face in Seattle, right? I mean, because it comes right across in the jet stream. So I just really love Emmy's, she's had a direct impact, right? By identifying who did it. So I keep wondering, how do you color code the space debris? How do you know which country is responsible for the?
Yeah. So here's a cool thing, Joellen, and I love everything that you just said. Right? It's like this is, I think, part and parcel with our work, with Astrograph, is that it's not obvious, which objects belong to who, and in fact, one of the things that we've seen is we actually have to develop a Rosetta Stone across different registries and databases, because object 1, 2, 3 and so's database may be 4, 5, 6, and somebody else's. There's no real standardization across the global space community, and even how they label or name stuff.
I remember
which is crazy.
Your taxonomy. I remember you working on that taxonomy, and I was stunned. It didn't exist.
I know. And the other thing too is we've looked at, the UN has this, treaty on space object registration, which kind of gets to what you're saying. Hey, whenever somebody launches something, basically whoever the launching state is, register your object with UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. And the treaty defines launching state as the state that launches an object in space, the state that procures launch of an object in space, and the state from whose territory or facility an object is launched. And so multiple launching states can actually be associated to a given object. So if Acme Incorporated in the United States goes through India to launch a satellite, both the United States and India are both jointly liable for any damage that that object incurs. And there is no place right now at this instant, if you wanted to know who's liable and who's jointly liable for any object in space, you will not find that, which is the next thing that we're working on. And it's part of what you're talking about, Joellen. What Emmy did is say, okay, here's the impact, here's the effect, here are these measured kind of consequences of behavior, and we can attribute, we can say these things belong to these people, and here's where you can start tracing that attribution. So I think that's critical. You can't manage what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't measure. So there's that. So okay, anybody else? Go ahead. I don't want to steal the show here.
I'll just build a bit, because Joellen and Emmy's story, it kind of gives this sense of cognitive dissonance. Emmy, your story is really inspiring, and it's thinking, well, why aren't we doing exactly that? Well, there's historical reasons for it. I mean, on one hand, you could say early on when some of the key players in space started experimenting, they were just trying to get things into space, and then you can't see them once they're there with the human eye on Earth. So they are kind of mysteriously there for the average person. And there wasn't this sense of accountability that what I send to space, I need to be responsible for its end of life until later, right, in our experiences. So we had decades of putting things into space and not worrying about it, quote unquote, not wondering what the responsibility would be. And of course, now we're much more aware. And now, we've had traditionally between, 2,000, 3,000 operational satellites at a time. And people are now planning for individual companies who would like to operate 5,000, 8,000, more satellites as just as one company. This is not something we've seen before. So we're literally entering a new era where, one, we understand the problem better, but also the scale of the kinds of things that need to be managed is proposed to be really, really changed. So we're actually at not just a question of why aren't we doing the obvious thing, but also our next challenges are going to be greater than we've ever seen before, which is why Moriba and I do a lot of coordination on these topics. But I appreciate one thing about Emmy's story. You mentioned actions taken by different sectors, right? You mentioned that there's public sector outcry of individual people and communities kind of saying we're consumers, we want to buy something smarter. There was voluntary action by companies, and there was action, as you said, later on by the government. So we try to think about this. I do think we always need this combination of public behavior, university-based behavior, government behavior, and hopefully voluntary behavior by companies. This is why Moriba and I have been working for the last couple of years on the space sustainability rating. And it is inviting two kinds of behavior. Particularly, we're encouraging anyone who operates a satellite to self-volunteer to get rated according to a set of technical behaviors. As you heard, we as the science community and the engineering community know what the behaviors should be to reduce space debris risk. So we've codified them into a list, into a point score system. And that means that we can ask them, how are you sharing data about where you are? How are you announcing to the public, what your objects are and what you're responsible for? How are you working toward avoiding collisions? How are you also choosing an orbit that's not already crowded, and then ideally making a plan to get out of that orbit as soon as you can when you're finished? These are all behaviors we have agreed upon as a global community that are safe in space. So now we have companies that are saying they are willing to first go with us in a private way and get tested privately and kind of see how they're doing, and then later get actually publicly announced scores. But this is just going to be one layer in that portfolio. We will see companies adopting the score. We'll see some companies who choose not to, and they may be the ones you can assume would have lower scores. And we'll see countries, we hope, ideally adopting some of the principles or maybe the direct language from our notes from the space sustainability rating into their regulations. This is something we're advocating for. But it will require this combination of multi-sector activity, government, private sector, universities, even those who are nonprofits playing a role in this discussion. What's really striking too, though, is the question of, even if we did really well, like starting now and try to behave correctly from today forward, there's a historical challenge of the objects that, especially pieces of old rockets and pieces that were like dropped off of a satellite to cover a lens, for example, that were just very small objects that are not controlled. There's those objects that are still there. So there's still the question of how to, get rid of old trash and then how to design things better in the future. Our team's working on one example, which is a system that would be a low-cost propulsion system based from wax, ideally beeswax. We're testing to see if it would work, that we would encourage those who work on small satellites to put on their mission so they can deorbit themselves safely at the end. And it will be hopefully low cost and low complexity and non-toxic, which we think will be useful. But again, even if we do really well going forward, we still have historical challenges. But what's exciting too is to see so many new countries are excited to get involved with space. We have to address this. Otherwise, the historical trash created by a few countries like the US and some of our fellow space-faring countries is going to be a problem for all the other great countries that are getting involved with space now.
Yeah, for sure. One thing is that, you're kind of alluding to this, Danielle, a little bit, is how do we clean up some of the stuff that's there? I think one of the things that humanity has to embrace is that we're going to have to learn to live within our own filth in space, meaning just like with the oceans, there's no way to get rid of all the trash. That's impossible. We'll never get to that pristine space environment again. And so people just need to embrace, look, there's hysteresis. There's some level of filth that we're never going to get rid of that we have to learn to live with. So yes, let's mitigate. Let's not continue to let the curve grow. Let's clean up some of the stuff that's there, but recognizing that there's no way to clean all of it, So there's a little bit of that.
It's a very sobering thought.
We're learning to live with that carbon pollution in our atmosphere, where what's there, carbon dioxide removal is incredibly difficult and extraordinarily expensive, both in money and in carbon emissions themselves, because it takes energy to do. So we're going to learn, this the IPCC says, we can choose to flatten the curve to not emit that more that makes the consequences so much worse, but we are going to be living with what we've done. I'm just hopeful because we've learned, we have more and more monitoring of carbon emissions, both from space and from the atmosphere and from the ocean now. And it is, again, a combination of law and sort of grassroots monitoring, which, so our robot floats now, we just got funding just this last year, just October, right? For the global array of carbon monitoring floats. That is just being deployed right now, never existed before, couldn't do in real time carbon monitoring of the ocean's uptake or ocean acidification, which is basically the same thing. So this is we're in this incredible challenge, and these are parallel things. When you say what happens here, it also is that our atmosphere is expanding, and we are, orbital decay is a thing, and it's, space weather is not just affected by our sun, it's also affected by our lower atmosphere weather, which is wild, finding out that we're all connected. But I'm encouraged by, when Danielle says we have this history, et cetera, turns out, they're using satellite technology now to hunt fish pirates. Pirate fishing boats are being caught by citizen scientists who are basically examining the fishing lights at night as they hop into a marine protected area at night and then hop back out during the day to avoid detection. They're looking for these behaviors, and they've of course obscured their RFID, et cetera. So you're actually looking for identifying markings on boats and following them all the way to port by satellite. So I keep looking at it going, well, at this point, you're hoping that they self-identify, self-register into these, and with more and more countries starting to, launch and put things into space. I keep thinking, with your space watchers, I mean, is everybody got their telescopes out? Do you know who put up what and where? And are we checking all of these things? Because, we are still hunting our fish pirates. Are you hunting your space pirates? I am not an expert on who's watching what. I know we do a lot of, space object identification here at my university and at others, but it's such an interesting idea to get the people involved. They don't like the idea. I'll just flat say, I think the majority of humans, who are out there helping catch fish pirates, they want that cleaner, better environment for their kids and their grandbabies. And I just can't bear it. It's why I get up in the morning. So I just have little kids now, but I hope to have grandbabies, right? And if my granddaughter tugs on my sleeve and says, Grandma, why didn't you do something while it would still matter? While it would still make a difference? Why didn't you do something? I can't bear it. I can't bear it. I can't be that grandma. So I'm hoping everybody makes a push. And on the space, I want there to be a collective push, not just a top-down regulation thing, but an up push of humans to embrace our more sustainable world, right? It's, you take out your toys, you put them away. You put your socks on the floor, you pick them up and put them in the hamper. This is kindergarten stuff. And it does take extra effort to do that. But then, like Moriba says, we won't have to live in our own filth.
Exactly. No. So look, I mean, really quick. I love the whole. That's right. The pirates on the fishing pirates, that sort of thing. One of the things that we're pushing to do with Astrograph is make this into a participatory sensing system. So kind of like citizen science, right? There's like a citizenscience.gov that I'm trying to motivate people in the US government to help me establish, but it's like, yeah, let's get people that have, binoculars and telescopes, and just like a Waze for space. Oh shit, there's like, there's a cop hiding behind that barrel over there, or there's a piece of debris in this place. Can you confirm or deny that this thing is still there? So for sure, we want to do something like that, and it would definitely tie in with the things that you said, Joellen. So that makes sense. And I guess another, before I let Emmy and Michael chime in, if they'd like, is this idea of monitoring, CO2 and all this other stuff. We're trying to establish a carbon footprint analog for space. I'm calling it a space traffic footprint. We know it has to be like some sort of composite index, but I would love for you folks to help us kind of come up with ideas about what a space traffic footprint would actually be measuring or quantifying in terms of a burden to the environment. And I think that this is a critical sustainability metric that doesn't really exist today. So just planting those seeds and just opening it up to Emmy or Michael to chime in.
Yeah, I'll chime in from the discussion that's just had. And I think what's really interesting in the plastics world, and you were saying about it, Danielle, is that things, if you stopped stuff going into the environment, then the amount of little bits would continue to grow because of the way it breaks down. So if we stopped all plastic going into the ocean from this moment on, the amount of microplastic would continue to increase because it's already in there. So we know that the damage is done. And then kind of linking onto Michael's point as well is, yes, there should be more focus on space debris, but I truly don't think, including myself, I'm very new to it, that people are aware of the risks and they're even aware that it's a thing, because it's not discussed in main brand media a lot and people can't see it. And how do you protect what you can't see? So plastics has got a lot of media attention. And don't get me wrong, it's a terrible situation where the ocean's so full, it's literally spitting plastic back out at us. You can just go and walk down the street and you'll see plastic on the floor or cigarette butts. We're literally just living in our own filth, as you could say, and we need to put it away and we need to take care of it. So what we can use plastic for is a gateway into other environmental matters. So people can see that, yes, the ocean is polluted, our parks are polluted, our streets are polluted, but we can pick it up and we can put it in the bin. We can try and get food that's wrapped less in plastic, or our own cosmetics that don't contain plastic, and try and minimize our own input, because then we find buy-in to trying to protect the planet. And then it opens our eyes to loads of other environmental issues, whether that be climate change, which arguably is way more important to fix right now than plastic. Plastic, we can try and make a change, quick, but slowly over time. But climate change is definitely the priority. And then space debris, people can open their eyes into space debris and understand how everything is linked. The world is becoming way more cheaper, everything is becoming faster, and people want information quicker and quicker. So we need to just rein in our own expectations and our own needs and start thinking about the planet's needs.
You bet. I'm going to start bringing people in from the audience, but Michael, did you want to say anything or?
Yeah, I love everything I'm hearing. I think I agree with everybody on everything, and just want to repeat what you said, Moriba, about the importance of data and sensors and measurements. You can't manage what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't measure. And so keeping an eye on things is a useful start. We have neighborhood watch for neighborhoods. Maybe we could do that for pollution and everything else. And I would say, to build on what Joellen was saying, is that we actually can go back a little bit. We might not get back to pristine levels, but we could scrub CO2 out of the atmosphere. We have done this with water and wastewater. We used to dump industrial sewage and other waste into the waterways. And we first stopped the sewage with the different water protection acts in the 60s and 70s. And then we went back and cleaned it up. And they might not have been returned to pristine nature, but they're certainly cleaner now than they were 100 years ago. And so it is possible to imagine. Sort of difficult in the ocean and space just because the volumes we're dealing with, but it is reasonable for us to expect of ourselves that we should at least stop making the problem worse, and then let's go back and clean up the mess we made.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I just say one thing about Michael's? I'm so sorry. I want you to bring people in, but Michael's absolutely right. And it turns out that Clean Air Act and Water Act that were so critical to cleaning up our waters in the U.S., the Clean Air Act in 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that carbon dioxide is a pollutant under the Clean Air Act, and the EPA is required to regulate it. Now, you could argue that we haven't seen significant new regulation and enforcement of that regulation yet. However, the United States is 20% off its peak emissions of carbon dioxide already. And does everybody know when the inflection was? So the ruling was in April, and our peak emissions were in October of 2007. I'm not kidding. So we do need bottom up. It's absolutely true, but that regulation thing that Moriba is talking about, the laws also have to back that up, right? You have to, and if that's not there, then our bad actors, our pirates, can't be held accountable in the public. They can be accountable by the public square, the consumers, but for people who are really just out for the profits, sometimes that's not enough. you have to have other, regulatory options for putting them out of business. So I'm thrilled that Michael brought up this sort of, how we do this. It's these multi-phase, all the way from Emmy's, identifying to the government finally saying, you know what, none of that. Let's not do that anymore. It's great. But what worries me is that the Clean Air Act is old. That's the 70s. Why haven't we had some equivalent to deal with climate change, or internally with, we know we're, putting thousands and thousands of new, CubeSats and other things up. Why haven't we, taken steps internally in our own nations to start taking a harder look at this sustainability and regulating it, even more than we do?
Absolutely. Good points, Joellen. All right, Valentin, let's bring Valentin on to the stage and see what Valentin has to ask.
So, good morning, good afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm unsure. I have an inner conflict. What is better, to switch off the space services and bring back our economy to the 70s, as we do not have, as the impact, we do not have transports, we do not have the capability to communicate, or to have the problem with the Green Deal. So to do both, I'm skeptical in that sense. So
yeah. Can you clarify, man? Because I'm really trying to understand what you mean by that.
The global economy is addicted to space services. We are all depending on services out of space. Mm-hmm. If this is switched off, we are roughly, in the economy-wise, in the 70s, as we do not have more, the global logistics will break down, and so on. So we are addicted to space services.
Right.
And I do have now an inner conflict in that sense with the Kessler effect, meaning switch off the space services, we could save the Green Deal.
I'm trying to understand what you mean by saving the Green Deal, I guess.
Meaning, if we do pollute so much, we do have an overproduction, and the system of space and Earth, including environment, is connected together via the space services. As if the space services are not anymore available, our economy will break down. Mm-hmm. This economy breakdown would save the Green Deal.
Okay, so how about this, man? Before Michael goes, we can just get rid of computers and cell phones and then go back to, like, writing letters and using the post office and stuff. And I mean, maybe that might save some stuff too. Let's let Michael chime in on this.
It's not the point. It's about the point that we do not manage the Green Deal with our pollutions, and we do not manage the space debris problem. So what is now the better solution, or does one solve the other?
So there's the Green New Deal, which is a policy concept in the United States, which doesn't even exist. Like, it's not even written down in a way that people can vote on, but it's this idea that we should modernize and green up the energy infrastructure in the United States. And there's a version of the Green New Deal or something like that in Europe, which is very deployment oriented and actually is much further along than the United States. And as someone who's worked in Paris for the last 3 years, I have a view of both. And I would say that space services and the space economy are not at all in conflict with the desire to clean up the future. In fact, space might be a critical enabler for it. A lot of the Green New Deal's theses in the United States, like the underlying concept, is a lot of modernization. That modernization, better data, better technology is a way to make our grid, for example, cleaner and more reliable and more affordable and more equitable. And so actually space services and the space economy is not in conflict with the desire to decarbonize on Earth. It might be one of the enabling technology and data platforms we need for it. And I think that will be true in Europe and the United States and Japan and elsewhere. Most of the deployment actually is on the ground, like fuel substitution, maybe replace oil with natural gas or electricity for cars, that kind of thing. And space for tracking the supply chains and the emissions, a lot of methane leak emissions, that kind of thing from space. Space is an enabler for it. So I don't think these are in conflict. I think they're actually very compatible with each other. Having said that, the Green New Deal, at least in the United States, is still sort of an imaginary thing. It's mostly a concept. It's not actually legislation that people are voting on yet.
Thanks.
Nice.
It's not in conflict. It really isn't. This sustainability, what Moriba was saying, et cetera, about managing decay, making sure that you understand that you're responsible for the full life cycle of everything you create and put in space. It's very similar to being responsible for everything for, the equivalent, you could say just, a carbon tax, which we don't have, but which, Canada and other places do, is a way to think about, well, are you paying for the impact of the pollution and the electrification that we'd like to do? And of course, here where I live in the great state of Arizona, we're cutting our emissions as well. And we've done that really without any significant regulation because it saves us money. We don't want to spend money on fossil fuels. It's unreliable and dirty and bad air quality, et cetera. So we'd like to be able to see across our Grand Canyon. We'd also like to be able to save a buck. So when we move to hydropower, to nuclear, to solar and wind, we're really just investing in our kids' bright sky, blue sky futures. These are not incompatible. There's no need to go, you can buy a Ford F-150 Lightning that has no emissions anymore. So this is not about, degrading your lifestyle. It's about upgrading your lifestyle.
Joel, that's awesome that a pickup truck is the symbol of being able to have what you want in the United States, while taking care of the environment. I'm with you on why that symbol makes sense. I have to just bring in the point of view of like the rest of the world, loving the story though, because we could ask the question, how are countries, I spend a lot of time as a guest of countries, places like parts of Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and there's small island nations in the Pacific. And so they're also asking the questions. They're first trying to adapt to climate change, which is affecting them right now. And they're changing, how they respond to coastal infrastructure and erosion and land subsidence. And they're also thinking about how to use space, to help them, move forward for their own development goals. And yes, the pickup truck is perfect, but many of them have other aspirations also, to increase access to education and healthcare and good jobs. So there's going to be a couple different stories happening. Some are the cases where people have comfortable lifestyles now, and we want to kind of maintain that. And there's those who are striving for, growing populations in cities where people are moving from rural areas at great numbers, and they need to figure out how to have good infrastructure. But I agree that space is helpful in both cases.
Booyah, booyah. All right, let's bring Saba on stage.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for your really interesting perspectives. I really appreciated Danielle's earlier point about learning from Indigenous communities. This is a topic we're interested in the Ethics and Human Rights Group and the Space Generation Advisory Council as well. But I do believe the biggest challenge here is how do we foster this change in perspective in the general population when we tend to prioritize economic and individual benefits, of course, depending on culture, but we do tend to prioritize these things over the community and the well-being of Earth as a whole. So how can we inspire more collective and environmental thinking when our ideologies are so different?
Yeah, great question. Who wants to tee that one? Anybody?
We're all afraid of that one because that's actually the question for humanity, right? How do we take collective action when we have shared fate?
And we would like to collectively throw Danielle under the bus to answer this one.
This is something I think about a lot. I was just making a note, and I'll say it verbally, but you're all invited to join tomorrow for another webinar. Of course, that's the era we're in of Zoom webinars, but we're fortunate to be hosting 3 great speakers, and the topic is asking, what are both indigenous and anti-colonial views toward human activity in space? And I'll just highlight that I think there's, of course, a lot to look back on and complain about in history. There's a lot of examples of humans not achieving either consideration for other people's needs, or kind of going beyond economic gain and actually thinking in a more generous way toward people who are different. We have an opportunity though, because right now it's interesting that people from lots of different backgrounds are able to communicate in much lower cost ways and build a sense of empathy together. I think we do see the younger generations kind of thinking of other people, other humans who live in other places as humans. This is actually relatively new, right? That the humans who live in one continent consider the other folks in the other continents as humans of the same value. So I do have a lot of hope, but there's a lot of work to be done. I read from scholars who actually have provided some really good maps. It actually often starts at the local scale. So one level is just, I really get inspired when local mayors and entrepreneurs and university professors will sometimes host projects where just in their own neighborhood with one lake or one region, they're going to ask, how can we consider environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic growth, and try to find the balance. One great example, we have collaborators in the country of Benin in West Africa, and it's a beautiful country where I often get to visit, and they're focused on a lake that needs different kinds of remediation due to invasive plants. And there's an urbanized community and a more kind of traditional living community that lives without electricity and mainly uses human-powered boats. And the two communities are cooperating on the issue of how to manage the lake. And it's a good thing to see across language and historical kind of barriers. So when that happens at the local scale, we get models of healthy living that actually could and kind of cross these challenges of environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And the best case is that some folks who are leaders get to know each other across regions. So right now I have projects like that happening in West Africa and Indonesia and in South America. And sometimes we have meetings where we get all together and talk about what we're doing. So now you have some sharing and some solidarity building across these different communities. And then sometimes it also gets a chance to kind of go up to a higher level, maybe national level rather than local. So I think it happens as a kind of a snowball effect. And I hope, if we keep pushing, it will grow. But I think it starts local and leads to kind of cross geographic locations to solidarity. I didn't make that part up. I draw from great writings by people like Angela Davis and Charlene Carruthers, who've talked about how to build movements across social groups. And then from there, we need to continue to ask, how do we, push for this change at the level of, national legislation, but also informal or like more grassroots activities happening together. I think it's not impossible, and I really want to appreciate writings. I've been reading a lot of Black women who start social movements and kind of seeing how they work. They've shown a lot of examples we can follow from. So I'll make the note in the chat and put the link for tomorrow's event. But it's going to take work from lots of people over lots of years. But I see a lot of hope.
I'm so glad. And that is how I completely believe and agree and hope in the same way. But I also, as a scientist, say, well, what I can do is, follow Imi's example, and I can tag all the sheep, right? We can keep tagging, showing, demonstrating, letting the people know what's happening, to their world, to their environment, to space. Open the doors, let everyone see. Because in fact, we still live we live in these societies where an unbelievable amount of our labor and our resources go into the pockets of incredibly few people. And some of this damage that's being done is being done to save a buck, right? It's being done because it's cheap. So basically culling those resources off and putting them into individual pockets while damaging permanently our living environment for everyone, where of course the most vulnerable and under-resourced have the least ability to be able to adapt to this changing environment. When we dump carbon pollution, we are changing the temperature on the thermostat for every grandma in India and Bangladesh, right, who won't be able to sleep at night because it'll be too hot and too humid. That's not a joke. You can't, if you don't have the resources to put an air conditioner in your window, this will be uncomfortable. So at this point, I so think that there's a social science aspect to this, that physical science, we want to show who's doing what to whom. These global commons of our space and our ocean are examples of how we are coming to know, to demonstrate, to visualize, to show. You know, you say, well, you just throw it up and you couldn't see it anymore. And when people used to throw, you know, the bottle in the ocean and then it would drift off and who knows where it would end up. Well, it's not so vast that we can't see it all now. We are 7 billion people. We can identify literally every scrap if we want to, right? Now it's not necessary, but so I love this hope, and I hope that our physical scientists can support the movements that are going to happen in order for us to get to that more sustainable future. If Danielle doesn't do what she needs to do, then how will, you know, then I'll be tugging, that kid is going to be tugging on my sleeve, right? It's like absolutely. All together now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to know, we're at the top of the hour. We got 15 minutes left. Is everybody cool with that? Everybody can hang on for 15 minutes? Michael?
I'm supposed to jump to another call, but let me send an email and see if I can buy myself the time. I might disappear, but
all right. You know, if that's the case, look, man, got to do what you got to do. But no, it's been good having you so far. But yeah, just let us know. Let's get Rick Peterson involved here.
Hi there, everybody.
Hey.
Great conversation. I've been bombarding you with questions and comments all the way through this, so I apologize in advance for that. But I was just making some observations, and I kind of have a question, but just, you know, the observation was not from an academic perspective, but more for somebody. I've been working for 30 years, helping multinationals and early stage clean tech companies build sustainable businesses and brands. So it's from a unique sort of a different kind of perspective. And we started this call looking at the subject, and then since the discussion started, it reminds me so much of what has happened already in the past in many other industries. And they may seem quite disconnected, but you look at the forestry industry, you look at chemicals, you look at apparel, and those companies and organizations and the public policy supporting them, they had free reign. They had unlimited resources, you know, unlimited trees, unlimited workers, no scrutiny, but all of a sudden they didn't have that anymore. And I think the reason is that they had this gap between what their priorities were as an industry and then the priorities of the stakeholders. There was this growing gap until it all kind of blew apart. It kind of exploded in a crisis or some other thing. And I kind of see with you know, the introductory note, with your introduction this morning about this backlash against this sort of billionaire space race. And it's really unfortunate because it's a real opportunity for the space industry to do something right, you know, and really find a way to not just talk about space debris or not just talk about human rights independently of each other, or talk about, EDI, or talk about social justice or whatever independently of each other. But I think there's an opportunity here for the industry to come together and find a way to really do something and, you know, take concrete actions in terms of environmental, social, and governance. And there's really interesting, I think I mentioned in my comments, there's a couple of really good exceptions. I think the work being done on space debris is an absolutely best practices, but it's limited. You know, what's being done on emissions, what's being done on material recycling, reuse, and reduction, not much. What's being done in social justice, not much. What's being done in the European Space Agency is working on, women in science and gender equity. But again, that's limited. You know, the industry still is run essentially by old white-haired males, unfortunately. And so, you know, the question in my mind is really, you know, can we find a way to, you know, really take some concrete actions in ESG impact areas and do a better job selling it? Because much of the discussion today, is, do people really know how important Earth observation is to climate change mitigation and management and reduction? I doubt they do. The average person probably doesn't really know. And this is like old tech. but they don't really know. You know, do they? So the question is I think the industry needs to find a better way to position itself more effectively too. So, you know, the brand of the space industry was used to be one of the world's best brands, essentially, national pride, you know, new tech, thousands of jobs, and then it kind of gradual, slow burn, slow decline, and now it's coming back with a vengeance. But there's a negative backlash against the style of communications and the kind of values that are being projected, and that's really unfortunate because, you know, there's an opportunity to do it right. So I'm making a big speech, but I was just trying to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, anybody? You said a lot of things, man. So it's kind of like, you know, you spread yourself across many things. So might take everybody.
Maybe I can just narrow it down one.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Do you think that the space industry has done enough, like in terms of concrete actions, but its own environmental, social, and governance issues yet?
Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I can't answer it for space, but I can answer it for plastic, which is kind of similar. So with plastics, it's been very slow, like discussed with the microbeads and facial scrubs. But what we found that is a very finger-pointing, blaming culture where people are blaming countries, industry are blaming other industry. It's almost turned into a blame fest. So what we need to do is strip everything away and get around a table and discuss how we can try and make things better. And I understand there's always going to be a competitive market and people need to make money and value, but we can discuss how to go forward all together. Some countries will be better at waste management than others. Some industries will be better at being greener than others, but we need to share that information and not hold it back, because if we hold it back, then we're not learning, and education is power. So I think that if industry, especially the space industry, and I know very little about it, hand on heart, but if they can put environmental protection and guidance in the fundamentals of their company and get people on board of that, and all the way from how they start making a product all the way to the end of how it's going to be disposed and what's going to happen to it in the environment, that needs to be discussed right from the beginning, not at the end, which is happening now.
I guess the good news is that this is a well-trodden path. You know, you look at the forestry industry, everybody knows FSC. You see it on all your, hopefully you see it on your paper packaging, et cetera. That's a multi-stakeholder initiative. It's labor unions, indigenous peoples, and corporations and governments all sat around it together, and they created an international standard that and it's across all environmental, social, and governance factors. And that was from the world's worst sort of disaster situation, clear cutting, people chaining themselves to trees, to now going beyond crisis mode to something that is really, a world-class standard and being copied by many other people like MSC for Marine Stewardship Council, et cetera. I think that's something that the space industry needs to be thinking about very seriously.
I'll just chip in on that as well. So industry has a part to play, but then governments. If the consumer has a very powerful, but albeit small part to play in their own lifestyle and minimizing their own waste, industry have to give people the accessibility and the options to make it cost effective for, to get the products that you need. But then if they're not being environmental, this is where governments need to come in, and governments need to enforce standards. Governments need to enforce better environmental practice. So we should be steering the governments to make those decisions for us, in that they're saying, right, you have to meet these guidelines and you have to do this. And that's from having healthy discussion altogether, bringing in lots of different people like scientists, policymakers, anyone, dustbin men, a shopkeeper, because everyone's got their part to play in the table.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Indeed. All right, look, we have like 7 minutes left. I wanna use this time to see. Let's see if Mauricio is around to come on stage real quick.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Mauricio.
Hello, how are you? Hope you're doing fine. Thank you for the event. It's been really great hearing from you. My question kind of goes with what Danielle has been talking about. I relate a lot from what she's saying, especially from the indigenous communities aspect. But it's a question of what do you think is the importance of democratizing space resources for the future of space sustainability? So how much do you think being able to make space resources available for everyone, and with everyone I mean everyone, like more countries to I guess going into different levels of class, and also how that relates to the optimal growth of space development and how that can affect if space is a resource for everyone or only for the benefit of a few. And like I said in the question I wrote, I think if we look at like historically, critically at the history of technology and modernity, we can begin to answer this question. And I would just like your input on that and how you think people, especially younger people, should start looking at this issue and trying to frame it in research and in the work that we do earlier in our careers.
Yeah, Danielle.
Thank you, Mauricio. Happy for the discussion. I'll just note, you should read my thesis. It's a good starting point for the conversation. It's available. I can put the link in the chat. But also, I welcome folks. I have actually an open office hours most Thursdays at 5:30 Eastern, which may not fit everyone's time zone, but it's a chance to have these conversations for anybody who wants to chat. So I'll put that link in the chat as well. But I'll just highlight, I think you're so right that looking at history is key. And when you use the phrase space resources, there's a couple different categories that come to mind for me. On one hand, you can ask, who's benefiting from the current infrastructure that we have in space? We have orbital systems, especially in the areas of scientific research, observation of the environment, communications, positioning. I can share some positive things. In my master's work back in 2008, I demonstrated that every country in Africa had examples that I could find without even traveling. I looked at them online, and I could see activities that were enabled by these satellite-based technologies in every part of Africa. I wanted to just take that example and kind of find empirical information. So we can say that every country is represented around the world in using space infrastructure, but of course it doesn't mean that there's equal benefit or equal application everywhere. But it is cool to see the local leaders. I am often privileged to get to know leaders of space agencies. I sometimes call myself a space tourist, by which I mean I like to go to different countries and visit their space facilities, their museums, their space agencies. So I've done this in all of the world. I've done this in Ghana and Nigeria and Kenya and South Africa and Malaysia and Singapore and Vietnam. It's a long list, so I won't do the whole thing, but I often visit. And so I can say that I love meeting the leaders who have the job to ask how can their country harness resources like in terms of infrastructure and services in their country. And there's work to be done, but there's also a lot to applaud on that progress. Another category then is the idea of the next generation of resources. And so one thing that's on my mind these days is there are plans that will soon be technologically feasible for companies that are based under a certain country's flag to try to access resources in situ on places like the moon and eventually asteroids. And here's a different question for which I don't think we have quite the same level of maturity in our thinking. And I want to throw out the idea that there are places in the solar system that we haven't fully written down yet that are probably equivalent value. We heard earlier from Joellen about the beautiful Grand Canyon. We've agreed for the Grand Canyon and for many other places around the world that they are heritage sites that we want to celebrate for generations. So there probably are such places also in space. So I call for more discussion on what it means to set aside certain places for preservation and conservation. And I think this is also why I like to talk to indigenous communities, many of whom have a cultural, historical way of thinking about the sacredness of places like the moon. I think they have some good suggestions to add to this discussion. So then there's the question, if we are going to have some areas for conservation, there may also be some areas for use. And I think, again, there's dialogues happening. You can look up the moon dialogues, for example, but more work needs to be done, even within our treaty language, to say, what does it mean for groups from different countries and different ethnic backgrounds and language backgrounds to have access and equal benefit? There's been calls for things like having sort of a shared fund so that the money that is gained from space resources that are achieved on the moon, for example, would actually go into sort of a global sharing. But the question would be, is that relevant to what happens currently in various national systems? It has to be debated further. So I think this generation, that's why I started my discussion saying this generation has a chance to weigh in on debates that are going to set precedents for years to come. So I hope that young people get involved with the Space Generation Advisory Council, the official channel to send your ideas to the United Nations, because you can write reports that go to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. Many of you might already be involved, so please keep doing that. Thank you.
Very nice, Danielle. So with that, it's a wrap. Mauricio, thank you. I'm going to give, we got 2 minutes left. So to you ladies, Michael has left us for other pastures, but we are thankful that Michael was able to join us. Always welcome again. And so, yes, if each of you has any sort of closing remarks, go ahead now.
I'm happy to go. It's something that I finish all my talks with when I'm talking about plastic, and that even the smallest action can have the biggest output. So even just picking up a piece of litter on the street and putting it in the bin is going to stop it getting into the environment. So always value the actions that are even small.
Awesome. That's a great message. Joellen?
I'm just thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be with all of you. It's together, you know, there's going to take a lot of people from different perspectives and different places and different kinds of life. And we're going to have to work together, but all together. It's so exciting.
I love it. I love it. Danielle?
It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm both like humbled by the scale of the problems we've been discussing. So part of me is feeling that grief. And at the same time, you know, excited that, you know, all of you have committed your time and your energies to work on these challenging issues. So I think, you know, the scale is tipping toward optimism and hope. But really, for all the people who are up and coming into your careers, I think we depend also on you to learn multiple skills and be ready for these complex but really fascinating challenges. We won't be bored. There's lots of wonderful things to work on in the days to come. Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you all. Great guests again. And yeah, I think this brings us to a close for this session of Space Café, Moriba's Vox Populi. And I'll be very interested to see, you know, offline what all of us can do together, and maybe we'll develop some joint projects and be able to report out in a future MVP session, like where we're at with that. So I would love that. So I'm handing it back to Chiara and to Torsten.
You didn't mention the next one on the 14th of October. It's planned. I know it's far away for us, but we will be back on the 14th with the next great session. Chiara, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for such a wonderful talk. I feel absolutely inspired now. Before we all sign off, I would love to tell you all about our next Space Café events that are coming in the coming weeks. So on the 17th of August at 4 p.m. CST, we have our 33 minutes with Antonino Salmeri on his journey through the space sector with space law. On the 19th of August at 6 p.m. CST, we have our next Space Café Brazil hosted by Ian Grossner, and Ian will be joined by Dr. Chezino Nardin, the director of the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research, and this Space Café will be hosted in Portuguese. For our German-speaking audience, on the 24th of August at 4 p.m. CST, we have 33 minutes with Sabine van der Recke about the plans for the offshore spaceport in the North Sea. And on the 31st of August at 4 p.m. CST, we have 33 minutes with Ronald van der Breggen on NGSO systems, if they are an imminent success or a hype after all. So come to find out. And in the first week of September, we have 3 regional Space Cafés lined up back to back for you. So we kick off on the 1st of September at 4 p.m. CST with our Space Café Germany, which will be in German. Then on the 2nd of September at 4 p.m. CST, we have our next Space Café Scotland. And on the 3rd of September at 4 p.m. CST, we have our Space Café Russia, also hosted in Russian. And all our events are online on Eventbrite. As always, we really want to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up to our daily or biweekly newsletters. And if you want to treat yourselves with something special, become a Space Watcher. Your support will help us to continue our work. So just take out your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global. Again, thank you all in the audience for such an interesting session today and for all your questions and your comments in the chat. And a huge thank you to Moriba, Joellen, Danielle, Imogen, and Michael for this exciting conversation. And thanks to the entire team behind the scenes for doing that great job week in and week out. So I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. And thank you again for joining us. I hope to see you in the next weeks. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a space watcher. Thank you.